Today's story begins on October 27, 1940. John Joseph Gotti was born in the Bronx, the fifth of 13 children, and grew up in poverty. Gotti resented his father for not taking care of his large family. According to a 2002 report in the New York Post, he didn't provide for the family. He didn't do anything. He didn't earn anything. And we didn't have anything. Of course, there were many people like him who lived in worse circumstances, perhaps, but they weren't necessarily criminals or outlaws. Some of them became the most ardent of people to strive for a good life despite their lack of resources. This anger and loss that surrounded him, along with the lack of upbringing and guidance from his parents, led the young Gotti to the streets by the age of 12. He dropped out of high school when he was 16 and eventually became involved with the Gambino family, one of the 5 major mafia families in New York City. By the time of John Gotti's death 45 years later, he was the boss. He started out hijacking trucks and seizing merchandise, then worked as an enforcer for illegal gambling operations. Then, in 1973, Gotti played a role in the murder of James McBratney, who had helped kidnap and kill the nephew of Carlo Gambino, then the boss of the Gambino family. This strengthened Gotti's position in the family. As he rose through the ranks of the mafia, Gotti married Victoria DiGiorgio in 1962 and had 5 children. In 1980, Gotti's youngest son, Frank, who was 12 years old, was hit by a car after he accidentally drove his bike onto a main street. The driver was a neighbor of Gotti's, John Favara. Gotti's wife, Victoria, beat him with a metal baseball bat and he was hospitalized. Favara did not file a police report. According to history, the neighbor suffered for 4 months from death threats until he died. His body was found bludgeoned to death and thrown out of a car. The Gotti family said they were vacationing in Florida when their neighbor disappeared. However, the only finger of blame was pointed at Gotti, who was not known for tolerating his enemies. By the early 1980s, Gotti had gained an unwanted reputation within the Gambino family, as the family patriarch Castellano considered Gotti's habit of gambling $30,000 a night a burden. At the same time, federal agents took notice of his activities and began monitoring his hideout. In 1985, the FBI had gathered enough evidence to charge Gotti and Delacroce with racketeering, while other associates were involved in heroin trafficking. But the trial the following year resulted in Gotti's acquittal, of course after bribes were offered, to the point that the foreman of the jury in the case was tried and later convicted of taking bribes to vote in favor of acquitting Gotti. It seems that the heroin trafficking was taking place away from the crime family leader. After this incident, Castellano passed an internal decision to punish drug trafficking with the death penalty, and Captain Gotti was to take responsibility for any transgressions by his team. Here, Gotti wanted to speak on behalf of his spiritual father, Delacroce, to the leader of their gang. But before an understanding could be reached, his friend Delacroce died of cancer, and when Captain Castellano did not attend his funeral, Gotti considered the behavior disrespectful. 2 weeks later, specifically on December 16, 1985, Castellano was shot dead outside a restaurant in Manhattan, and of course the leadership role had come to Gotti, who became the leader of the Gambino family shortly after. His crimes, many of which he got away with, and his quick release from prison every time he was arrested, earned him many nicknames, for his ability to remain free and because of his shiny appearance and expensive suits, the most prominent of which was Teflon Don, as indicated by the biography website, which is interested in creating biographies of historical figures and events. By the late 1970s, John Gotti had officially become a certified man in the Gambino family. In 1976, Carlo Gambino died and Paul Castellano was chosen as the boss of the family, replacing his deputy, Aniello Nel Della Croce. Gotti considered Della Croce his mentor, and this snub angered him. He also hated Castellano because he had banned the drug trade, which brought in a lot of money for Gotti. However, he continued to work under Castellano until December 1985, when he orchestrated a deadly assassination attempt against him. Sammy Gravano reportedly spotted Gotti watching the killing from a parked car nearby. The following month, Gotti was named the head of the Gambino crime family. He took to his role with ease, often wearing expensive suits, pocket squares, and stylish haircuts. He became known as the Dapper Don, and unlike other mafia bosses who tried to stay under the radar, he made frequent media appearances seeking notoriety. Under Gotti's control, the Gambino crime family became heavily involved in the city's drug trade, particularly heroin. At its peak, the organization was making more than $500 million a year and had earned its reputation as the most powerful crime family in the country. However, Just 7 years after he took over, John Gotti's crimes caught up with him and he had to pay back his debt to society. As the head of America's largest crime family, John Gotti was always on the radar of federal authorities. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the FBI began monitoring Gotti and his associates, often relying on wiretaps placed in mafia meeting areas. Then, on December 11, 1990, the FBI arrested Gotti and charged him with numerous counts of murder, racketeering, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. During Gotti's trial, wiretapped confessions and Gravano's testimony led to the Gambino family boss being sentenced to life in prison in 1992. He was never to walk free again, as John Gotti died behind bars. He was held at the United States Penitentiary in Illinois and spent most of his time in solitary confinement. John Gotti's time in prison was largely unspectacular, but he was beaten once after he allegedly called another inmate a racial slur. Gotti continued to control the Gambino family while behind bars. In New York, his son John Gotti Jr. served as interim boss. However, Gotti Jr. himself was imprisoned on racketeering charges in 1999, at which point John Gotti's brother, Peter, began passing the baton. Peter took over after John Gotti's death in 2002 after a 4-year battle with cancer. In 1998, John Gotti was diagnosed with throat cancer and was transferred to the Federal Prison Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. There, doctors successfully removed a tumor. However, the cancer returned with a vengeance 2 years later. Gotti's health rapidly deteriorated, and on June 10, 2002, he died at the age of 61. The prison wanted to conduct an autopsy, even though it was clear how John Gotti died. His attorney, Bruce Cutler, said, "There's no need for it." According to the New York Post the day after Gotti's death, "We know what killed him." In New York, the Gotti family planned a lavish funeral. The New York Times reported that Gotti's bronze casket was carried in a Cadillac funeral car followed by 19 cars carrying massive floral arrangements in the shape of his favorite items, including a martini glass, a racehorse, cards, and a Cuban cigar. Despite his heroic performances, empty displays, and the murder of many innocent people, hundreds of people lined the streets of Queens during the funeral procession, including fans holding signs to honor the life of the notorious mafia man. Today, popular culture remembers John Gotti as the crime boss who made the mafia modern. He was the epitome of the mafia and one of the most notorious men in American history for the misery and destruction he left behind in his community. And here we come to the end of the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe.